Well, there'll be no more fear and the road is clear. The sky is clear and grey. I know what I'll do. Gonna put my faith in a party true. A team that knows a way to fight for me now every day. And that's my kind of party, the United Australia Party. Yeah, that's my kind of party, the United Australia Party. So sound the starting gun, you know we've just begun to make Australia great. We got it in us, mate. United Southern Sons. Won't throw away my vote.
That has changed the course of Australia's history.
Won't let us bob around. We're gonna hit the ground. We have the antidote. I know what I'll do. Gonna put my faith in a body
devoted to making sure the government of Australia changes, to make sure a new government's formed that can give help to the people and stop what's happening in this country.
And that's my kind.
The best life is a family. The best country is Australia. Love Australia.
Yeah, that's my kind of party. The United Australia Party.
We have to protect them, nourish them, and handle them the next generation to be the same.
Welcome everyone. My name is James McDonald and I'm the lead Senate candidate for the United Australia Party in Western Australia. The United Australia Party is standing candidates in all 15 House of Representatives seats in Western Australia. In fact, we're standing 151 seats in representatives throughout Australia and Senate candidates in all states and territories. We are the largest political party in Australia with 82,000 members. Our candidates are enthusiastic and committed to doing all we can to make Craig Kelly our next Prime Minister. Over to you, Victoria.
My name is Ralph Babette. I'm leading the Senate team in Victoria. The United Australia Party is standing in all 39 House of Reps seats in Victoria. Victoria has suffered the world's longest lockdown under Dan Andrews. Our team has a strong resolve to protect our freedom and our liberty. Thousands of Victorians have joined our party, determined to do all we can do to serve our nation.
My name is Dominic Martino. I am leading the UAP Senate team in New South Wales. New South Wales has the largest number of members in the United Australia Party. I first joined the party in 2015. The Liberals locked down most of Sydney and destroyed many of our freedoms. The United Australia Party has a plan to repay Australia's debt. All of our 47 candidates standing for election to the House of Representatives in New South Wales have a strong resolve to serve the Australian people.
My name is Desmond Adidi. I am standing with Clive Palmer, Martin Brewster and Jack McCabe for the Queensland Senate. The United Australia Party will field candidates in all 30 seats in the House of Representatives. A 3% maximum home loan interest rate over the next 5 years will preserve the nation's wealth. Freedom forever.
In South Australia, the United Australia Party is contesting all 10 seats in the House of Representatives. My name is Michael Arbin. I'm leading the United Australia Party team in the Senate in South Australia. We have a strong resolve not to let our country down. The UAP has pledged to provide $40 billion directly to hospitals to bring Australia's healthcare up to the standard expected by all Australians.
My name is Diana Adams and I am leading the United Australia Party Senate team in Tasmania. The United Australia Party is standing in all 5 House of Representatives seats in Tasmania. All our party members are working hard to make Craig Kelly Australia's next Prime Minister. Freedom forever.
I'm James Savulidis, the Senate team leader in the Australian Capital Territory. The United Australia Party can repay Australia's $1 trillion of debt by having the purchasers of Australian iron ore paying a 15% export licence fee on their purchases of iron ore. This will free all Australians from the burden of repaying Liberal and Labor's debt.
My name is Taylor Self. I'm the United Australia Party candidate in the seat of Solomon in the Northern Territory. Our Senate team and all our members want to bring about a positive change for Australia and see Craig Kelly become Australia's next Prime Minister.
Here we are at 5 a.m. in the morning with our UAP team setting up our visual display of $1 trillion worth of government debt, run up by reckless and wasteful spending of both the Liberal and Labor parties.
We've come here this morning as an army of us, been here this morning since about 5 o'clock, setting up a bit of a display. We have $1,000 billion notes representing $1 trillion, which is almost the debt. Here, each one of these notes that's represented here is $1 billion, $1,000 billion. That's what $1 trillion is. The government has put us in the debt during the last 2 years.
We're here to show you visually just how much debt the establishment has put us in. Labor and Liberal, like I keep saying, they are two wings on the same bird. So how much debt are we in exactly? Not just us, but future generations that will come next. Well, check it out here, ladies and gents. That's $1 trillion of debt. Over $1 trillion of debt. But how much is $1 trillion? Well, $1 trillion is 1,000 billion dollars. And $1 billion is 1,000 million dollars. That's how much debt we're in. That's how much debt we need to pay back, plus interest. Plus interest. So if you want this to end, we need to put Labor, Liberals, the Nationals and the Greens last on our ticket, because we cannot, not just us, our kids cannot afford a debt like this to get any bigger than what it is right now.
And it's just another year where they tell us that they'll be throwing money at the problems that they created and expecting Australians to be thankful and happy about it. I know I don't need to remind anyone that this money they're spending isn't free money, it's our money. And as I say, you can't spend your way out of debt. And a message to ScoMo and his pals, you can only spend your way to election victory so many times. You've wasted our money, money that we've worked hard for too many times.
That $100 billion debt is now 1,000 billion. This is a debt that unless we set forward a plan over the next decade, the payback is an inheritance that will leave our children and our grandchildren, meaning that they'll have less government services and higher taxes in the years to come because of this government's reckless and wasteful spending. Now, we won't hear any plan from Josh Frydenberg tonight to pay back this $1 trillion. We won't hear any plan from Mr Albanese on Thursday night to pay back this $1 trillion. The only party in this next election that will have a plan to pay back this $1 trillion is the United Australia Party. We're going to ensure that this is not a debt that we leave to burden our children and grandchildren.
Permanently freeze fuel excise now. Reduce Australia's cost of living. Vote 1 United Australia Party. Authorised by Clive Palmer for the United Australia Party, Brisbane.
Asian manufacturing dominates world exports. Australian iron ore makes it happen. A 15% export licence for iron ore exports can repay the $1 trillion of Liberal Labor debt and free your family. Australia needs a new government that can repay the debt by using Australia's preeminent position in resources. We need to increase your earnings, wages and standard of living. Vote 1 United Australia Party.
Authorised by Clive Palmer for the United Australia Party, Brisbane.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's now my honour to introduce to you our party chairman and lead Senate candidate in Queensland. He was deservedly named a National Living Treasure, and he was elected to the 44th Parliament of Australia as the federal member for Fairfax. Australia needs Clive Palmer and the United Australia Party now more than ever. Please stand with me and welcome to the stage Clive Palmer.
Yeah, that's my kind of party. The United Australia Party. Yeah, that's my kind of party. The United Australia Party. Yeah, that's my kind of party. The United Australia Party. Yeah, that's my kind of party. The United Australia Party. Yeah, that's my kind of party. Yeah, that's my kind of party. The United Australia Party. Yeah, that's my kind of party. The United Australia Party. Well, God bless Australia. And God bless all of you. Our party is a party founded on love for our country, love for each other, and respect for our citizens. That's what makes us different from all other political parties, because we care about our community and we're going to fight hard to protect it. You know, wages and living standards have declined in real terms over the last 10 years. So the Liberals' so-called full employment is not a success at all, but stands as a monument of their failure to deliver a better life for Australians. And if the cost of labour just gets cheaper and cheaper, of course there will be no more jobs. There'll be more jobs, but at what price? I'll tell you the price of our living standards. Australia faces $1 trillion of Liberal Labor debt. It's unprecedented in the nation's history. Home loan interest rates will inevitably rise. They won't just double thanks to the Liberal mountain of debt, they'll quadruple. Inflation in the United Kingdom is currently at 6.2%, and inflation in the United States has reached 7.9%. Currently, 40% of all Australian mortgages are under stress. When home loan interest rates double from 2 to 4%, as we know, 60% of all Australians will lose their homes, lose their mortgages. When loan interest rates go up to 6%, nearly 80% of mortgages in Australia will fail. When Australians lose their home because of increased home loan rates, nothing will stop Australian homes' assets from being sold offshore to foreign buyers, or the government would be the only buyers who could print enough money, then lease you back your own home. That's what they want, to control your freedom, your movement and your property. The property market will crash, and Australians who own their own home will see the value of it diminish. Because of the Liberal Labor debt, Australians will become economic slaves in their own country. Save Australia we must. Save Australia we will. Save Australians' homes and families. Australia must act now to save Australian homes, to save our country, our economy, and to protect our freedom and our independence. This is a national crisis. We must preserve the home and wealth each Australian currently has. Home ownership has been the cornerstone of our country for over 70 years. The United Australia Party has high on its agenda to implement policies that will allow younger Australians to enter the market so that they can establish their home, their family, and remain a stability in our community. Australians can never, ever trust the Liberal Party, the Greens or Labor.
They have sold out our country. Under Craig Kelly's leadership, the United Australia Party will reassert the government control it has under the Constitution for the benefit of all Australians. By requiring the interest rate on all housing loans to stay, as you know, below 3% for the next 5 years. Only the United Australia Party can ensure that home loan interest rates remain below 3% for 5 years. Australians must vote for the United Australia Party to save their home and to save their family's wealth, even if they work for the ABC. And you know, current projections are that it'll take nearly 180 years to repay the mountain of debt. But Josh Frydenberg says we won't even start repaying the debt for 10 years after he's left Parliament. Stop generations of Australians becoming economic slaves in their own land. The United Australia Party will deal with a Liberal $1 trillion of debt by implementing measures designed to protect the Australian economy from the impact of the failures of the political class of the Liberal, Labors and the Greens. As you know, Australian iron ore is supplying the boom in manufacturing in Asia, upon which the economies of China, Hong Kong, Korea and the rest of Asia depend. Asia's reliant upon Australian iron ore. Without it, they just can't function. Their standard of living will be destroyed. That is the reality of the tens of trillions of dollars that has been invested since the 1950s in China, Japan and Korea, based on the supply of cheap Australian iron ore. Australia supplies over 70% of their supply line. Their prosperity, the livelihood of all their people are linked to exports from Australia. As I said in my earlier speech at the Press Club, Australia has become a quarry upon which Asia bases its prosperity. And we know in the 1960s the Australian government had export licences from our iron ore, where importers of the ore paid the export licence. And the United Australia Party will introduce a 15% export licence for all iron ore exports from this country, and we'll pledge the proceeds from such a licence to be used for the retirement of the $1 trillion of Liberal Labor which face Australia at the moment. The export licence proceeds will be paid by China, Japan, Korea and the rest of Asia. They'll pay off the Liberal Labor debt within 20 years and in the process save Australians from high interest rates and the burden. We will save our country's economy and we'll keep Australia's AAA credit rating. With a cap on the bank home loan lending rates below 3% for the next 5 years, the United Australia Party will save 6 million Australian homes, defend prosperity and freedom of all Australian families, and most importantly, independence of our country. We cannot allow the whole country just to be dispossessed just because Labor and Liberal parties have recklessly run up debt. And you know, our other big policy, of course, is Australian superannuation, because we're among the largest pools of capital in the world. But much of Australia's super funds are invested overseas. So just as John Curtin in World War II brought back our troops to the Middle East to defend Australia against imminent attack from the Japanese, we'll bring back Australian super to defend Australia in a time of economic crisis under a United Party government. At least $1 trillion of Australian super can be brought back by the sale of shares in Europe and the United States, where it will be required by law to instead be invested in our country, to secure our citizens' economic prosperity and to maintain our independence. Australia provides a tax incentive for our super, and Australia needs to benefit from its investment. Australians work hard and deserve to have their super invested where Australia needs it most. In Australia, working for Australians, now. So the message for all Australians is that if you're happy with everything that's being done now, if you think it's sufficient, if it's enough for you and your family, then vote again for Scott Morrison Albanese. But if you really care about our country, for all the reasons I've set out, if you believe as I do that an interest rate of no more than 3% on our home loans for the next 5 years will secure yours and your neighbours' future? If you believe we must use Australian natural resource advantages to repay the $1 trillion mountain of debt that Liberal and Labor have left us and burdened Australians with, and if you believe that we should bring back $1 trillion of Australian super to create real jobs and higher wages and a better living standard as we go forward in this century, then you must vote for the United Australia Party. You know, courage. Courage is one of the rarest commodities in politics and public life. Public service has no reward. History and knowing you're doing all that you can for your fellow citizens is its only reward. There is no person elected to public office in the world that has more courage, more devotion than the leader of the United Australia Party, Craig Kelly. To lead our nation at a time of its greatest peril, please give a big, big welcome for the next Prime Minister of Australia, Craig Kelly.
Yeah, that's my kind of party, the United Australia Party. Yeah, that's my kind of party, the United Australia Party. Yeah, that's my kind of party, the United Australia Party. Yeah, that's my kind of party, the United Australia Party. Yeah, that's my kind of party, the United Australia Party. Yeah, that's my kind of party, the United Australia Party. Yeah, that's my kind of party, the United Australia Party. Yeah, that's my kind of party, the United Australia Party.
Fellow Australians, our Australian Constitution has no greater purpose than to protect and defend our freedom and the nation's security. The Constitution must become the hallmark of freedom. And the United Australia Party will propose changes to the Constitution to ensure freedom forever for all Australians. Today, our country is in crisis. The Liberals and Labor are keeping Australians in the dark. The Liberals and Labor are just waiting until after the election to lock us all down again and to destroy Australia's economic prosperity. When elected to government, the first matter on the agenda of the United Australia Party will be an enactment of an Australian Bill of Rights. We will outlaw lockdowns, protect the rights of all Australians to choose their medical treatment, and to preserve freedom of speech. The $1 trillion of debt Morrison and Frydenberg have run up will destroy the lives of all Australians unless we act now to stop it. Liberal and Labor's $1 trillion debt ensures that home loan interest rates will rise to above 6% per annum. And if that happens, 80% of Australians will default on their mortgages and lose their homes. They'll be out on the streets, dependent on government handouts and government control just to survive. Only the United Australia team can save your home. We'll pass a law limiting all home loan interest rates to be below 3% for the next 5 years to save your home and Australia's way of life. The United Australia Party is putting Australian families first. Regardless of anyone's political leanings, we all must stop the destruction of Australian home ownership. Since Federation, the Australian Government's Cabinet has been comprised of federal members of Parliament, voted and elected by the Australian people. The current Morrison government has imposed a national cabinet on the Australian people. This national cabinet is made up of individuals who have not been elected to govern on a federal level. Meanwhile, elected members of the Australian House of Representatives and the Australian Senate have been sidelined from proper decision-making processes. The United Australia Party believes the national cabinet should be abolished as soon as possible. Traditional government and freedom must be restored to the Australian people. The Liberal and Labors have locked down all Australians and have run up $1 trillion of debt, which, if left up to them, would take 180 years to repay. It will destroy the lives of future generations, destroy Australian prosperity and our children's future. The $1 trillion worth of debt is the elephant in the room that neither Labor or Liberals will address, because they are absolutely clueless as how to repay it. So Labor and Liberal during this election campaign simply won't talk about it. They won't tell anything about it. Only the United Australia Party will repay that debt and free Australia and your family for the future generations. We will lift this burden off our nation's back. There is currently over $50 trillion invested in Asian manufacturing, which dominates world trade. Australia is the biggest supplier of iron ore to Asia, which allows Asia to dominate the manufacturing export market, as simply they have access to Australian iron ore. Asian manufacturing has no alternative to Australian iron ore. The United Australia Party will introduce a 15% export licence payable on the export of all iron ore from Australia, and those funds will be quarantined for the sole purpose of repaying that $1 trillion of debt Liberal and Labor have incurred. The United Australia Party will free all Australians from Liberal and Labor's $1 trillion of debt. Only the United Australia Party will save Australia from the consequences that would normally flow from such a mountain of debt. In doing so, the United Australia Party will also save Australia's AAA credit rating. We will save the homes of Australians and increase the living standards and wages of all Australians. Only a United Australia Party government will put your family and Australia's interests first. Our regional communities are the backbone of our nation. And the United Australia Party is committed to stimulating economic growth in rural areas. Our cities are bursting at the seam. We are faced with heavy congestion, overdevelopment, serious housing affordability issues, and the mounting cost of living pressures in all of our cities. By providing a 20% tax concession incentive to people living more than 200 kilometres from a capital city, we can decentralise our vast continent and encourage people to move and settle in regional areas. And in doing so, we'll provide Australians with a lower cost of living and housing affordability. This plan will ensure our existing infrastructure in the regions and competitive industrial land is fully utilised. The movement of our citizens from the cities to the regions will reduce pressure on infrastructure in our cities and bring prosperity to all Australia. Regional Australia is the forgotten Australia by all political parties, as are Tasmania and the Northern Territory. We have to end the discrimination against rural industries and give them the means to compete internationally. Today, Japan has become the world's third largest economy by processing Australian resources. Wages in Japan are higher. The cost of energy is more expensive, and Japan suffers from the tyranny of distance. Yet we sell our mineral ores at between $40 to $200 a tonne, and Japan sells the final products for up to $20,000 a tonne or more. The United Australia Party's downstream processing policy will see more stages of the mining process happen on Australian soil rather than in foreign lands. This will not only result in much higher returns, but will stimulate economic growth, job creation, rising standards of living, and higher real wages for all Australians. Our plan will create jobs, increase our exports, and provide greater revenue and a rising rather than declining standard of living for all Australians. Higher export revenue means better education and health services for Australians across the breadth of this land. At rallies in every capital city and in regional areas across Australia, our party members and their supporters have made it clear to governments that enough is enough.
After the election, they'll lock you down, destroy the value of your home, use artificial intelligence to control you and laugh at you for voting for them. Save Australia. Vote One United Australia Party.
Authorised by Clive Palmer for the United Australia Party, Brisbane. If Liberal, Labor and the Greens are returned to Canberra, they'll continue to work together and there will be no way to stop future lockdowns and imposing mandates. It will mean a whole new world of repression. And at that point, there'll be nothing to stop them. United Australia Party are the last sentry at the gate, the last hope for our freedom. You can stop the repression. Vote One United Australia Party and freedom forever. Authorised by Clive Palmer for the United Australia Party, Brisbane.
We know that governments never give back freedoms they take from people. The people have to step forward and to take it back. In wars all over the world, from the mud and blood of the trenches of the Western Front, to the jungles of Southeast Asia, to the snow-capped mountains of Korea, to the islands of the Pacific, past generations of Australians have sacrificed their lives to give us all the freedom we have today. And in 2022, the trumpet sounds again to a new generation of Australians. It's a call to serve our nation. It's a call that we must answer. The call must be answered at this election. Save Australia we must. Save Australian homes and families. The United Australia Party will save Australia's independence. We must save Australians from what Liberal and Labors are planning after the election. Mr Morrison and Mr Albanese are being very nice to us before the election. But we know after the election they'll lock us down again and they'll implement fundamental changes in our lives. Australia can never surrender to total government control. Inflation has arrived because of the $1 trillion of debt both the Liberals and Labor have run up. The cost of living is on the rise. Home loan interest rates are already over 5% in the United States of America. The Liberals and Labor have no plan. They don't even care. They'll keep Australians in the dark and they'll say anything to influence this election. Only the United Australia Party has a plan and will save your home by freezing all home loan rates below 3% for the next 5 years. And for Australians who through hard work and good fortune own their own home, we'll preserve the value of your family home by avoiding the great bargain sell-off, which would happen if we allow the $1 trillion of Liberal Labor debt to destroy the Australian economy. Contrary to the High Court of Australia's ruling on the implied right to political free speech, the Liberal government, this Liberal government, has threatened media outlets and owners with the loss of government advertising revenue and have imposed censorship in Australia. Every day, the Labor and Liberal parties continue to disappoint the Australian people. The government continues to ignore hundreds of thousands of Australians in Canberra, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane and Perth and right across this nation who are fighting every day for our freedom and the right to choose. The current political parties continue on this path at their own peril. But if you believe, as I do, that interest rates of no more than 3% on home loans for the next 5 years is more likely to secure your family's future as we go forward in the next century, then you must vote for the United Australia Party. Australia's $1 trillion of debt means our economy is spiralling down and people are holding on to their savings in fear as cost of living escalates. People are suffering across the nation, in the Latrobe Valley in Victoria, in the Hunter region of New South Wales, at Elizabeth in South Australia, right throughout all the states of Queensland and Western Australia and all throughout Tasmania. Australians have lost hope in the future. We have to re-establish the confidence and lead the nation, not tomorrow but now. Now, Australia is the fourth largest holder of pension fund assets in the world. Australian super funds have around $3.5 trillion and are one of the largest sources of capital in the world. But much of it is invested in foreign nations and does not provide economic growth and employment for our citizens. Under a United Australia Party government, at least $1 trillion of Australian super currently invested in foreign nations will be required to be, by law, to instead be returned and reinvested in Australia. And reinvested to secure Australians' economic prosperity and maintain our nation's independence. $1 trillion of capital injected our economy is more money than Liberal or Labor can provide to our country. It's projected that by the year 2041, we'll have around $9.5 trillion in super. And that super must be deployed for the benefit of our country and our people, not some foreign nation. One of the United Australia Party's long-standing policies is to stop the provisional tax being paid in advance by Australian businesses, especially Australian small businesses, before a tax paid even before profits have been made. The United Australia Party will stop this unfair tax to allow an extra $90 billion to circulate in our economy and to provide GST revenue for the government and jobs and more jobs for Australians. Every time that $90 billion is turned over, it creates an extra $9 billion in GST revenue for Australia. The billions of dollars saved by this policy can be spent productively, create a change for the people who deserve it, the people of Australia. The United Australia Party will also abolish the fringe benefit tax to release over $6 billion into the economy. The fringe benefit tax is a negative tax. It stops Australians from doing things. It stifles demand, it stifles growth, and it kills employment. We have to remove the fringe benefit tax and get the economy moving. We don't want to penalise people for spending their money that they have earned. Spending creates wealth, jobs, and makes the economic pie bigger for all Australians to share. To assist in housing affordability, we'll make the first $30,000 paid on a home loan tax deductible for each year. This will be a massive boost to the construction industry and increase home ownership and home security. We'll make the first $30,000 paid on a home loan tax deductible each year and restore the great Australian dream to a young generation that currently have it taken away from them. We will do everything we can to ensure that that dream of home ownership, the opportunity for a young Australian to own their own home, is something we will fight every single day for. For too long, Australians have lacked incentive and confidence and felt they cannot help themselves. The Liberal and Labor parties have provided no clear future. The United Australia Party will change that. We'll change that and limit Australians what they can do, because under Labor and Liberal governments, they have had experience a declining standard of living. They have experienced a loss of incentives, with no activity and no growth. As the economy declines, the revenue shrinks and our schools and our hospitals go backwards. The United Australia Party, therefore, will reduce the taxation rate on a person's second job. This will result in higher income over average weekly wages by more than 50%, giving all Australians the incentive and providing government with increased revenue, which would not be if a person didn't take on that second job if they choose to do so.
Only the United Australia Party can repay the $1 trillion of Liberal Labor debts with an iron ore export licence of 15%. Get the $1 trillion of debt repaid. Vote 1 United Australia Party.
Authorised by Clive Palmer for the United Australia Party, Brisbane. Any of us that thought mass biometric surveillance would never happen in our country, it has already begun. Help United Australia Party to save Australia from the overreach of power and unwarranted control and suppression that both sides of government have shown us in the last few years. Help set Australia free. Freedom forever. Authorised by Clive Palmer for the United Australia Party, Brisbane.
Now we must respect and support our senior Australians who have built our great country. Our senior citizens are currently paid less than others relying on government support. We must change this as a priority. As a first step, because of the economic policies that we have, the United Australia Party will increase the pension for retirees by an extra $180 a fortnight. We want to see our retirees and those that have built this country living their old ages in dignity, not in poverty. Healthcare has been declining every year in Australia, and we cannot desert the sick or the dying. Our hospital staff are overworked, and the capital infrastructure is not up to the projected increase in demand. Despite the extra $1 trillion the government has borrowed and spent, little has been spent on building new hospitals or investing in healthcare. In government, our economic policies will enable the United Australia Party to inject an additional $40 billion worth of funding for health across this nation. And we will make the funding directly available to the hospitals without the states siphoning off a bit for themselves. Now, the Australian government, amazingly, is the main petitioner of bankruptcy and company liquidations. As a result of business closures, employees lose their jobs. The government then loses group tax, company tax, and in many cases exports and GST revenue. As a result of services in education and health that have to be cut to the projected revenue. If the government stopped driving businesses to the wall, especially small businesses, this would not happen. So we will restructure the system to keep businesses going and to keep people employed productively. When the government transfers people from gainful employment to unemployment, it just guarantees misery. Not on our watch. We'll also need to provide more funding for Education Australia. A free nation can rise no higher than the standard of excellence set in the schools, colleges, universities and TAFEs. Ignorance and illiteracy and underskilled workers are failures of our education system. They have bred failures in our social and economic systems, delinquency and unemployment, and chronic government dependency. This is a waste of human resources, a loss of productivity, and an increase in taxpayer-supported benefits. The United Australia Party will inject $20 billion in the education system in our first 3 years of government. It's time to invest in ourselves and the next generation. And in doing so, we will ensure that Australian students are taught Australian history, that they are proud of our nation, that Australian students are not only proud of our nation, but proud of our achievements, and they are made fully aware of the wonderful range of opportunities that they have that come with being an Australian. If we don't have confidence in ourselves, who will have confidence in us? We must educate our children as our most valuable resource. We must make it possible for those with talent to go to university, but we must also ensure that those who are educated can find a job after graduating. That's why our ability to compete internationally and to expand our exports is so important. Because our policy to pay back the debt, the United Australia Party will be able to forgive and remove all HECS fees. We will remove this burden and we'll give young Australians hope and encouragement. Now, most importantly, and probably most importantly of all, we must protect our nation. One hostile nuclear-powered submarine placed between Singapore and Perth, and Australia would be cut off of supplies of oil from Singapore, and we'd have to close the nation down within 60 days. If you thought the fights in the supermarkets were bad over toilet paper shortages, just imagine if there were shortages for bread, meat, milk, and other basic commodities. So we must take immediate steps to defend our nation, and to do this we must acquire nuclear submarines now. Nuclear submarines such as the Los Angeles class subs from the US, we can do that now, not in 40 years' time. Our Army, our Navy and our Air Force personnel are Australians and some of our most valuable members of our society. We cannot take their service for granted. We cannot disregard them as Labor and Liberals have done for the past 20 years. Our United Australia Party will link all service pensions to the average total male earnings. Australia needs to support Australian industries and to ensure that all of our policies are for the benefit of Australia first. We must encourage Australians to buy Australian produce. And the labelling and packaging regime needs to be changed so that Australians know clearly what products are Australian, so Australians can make freedom of choice in supporting Australian products. The United Australia Party believes that lobbyists should be excluded from holding official positions in political parties. Now, energy prices are just too high in Australia. And the United Australia Party will take real action to reduce them, as the cost of energy is the key to Australia's industrial development. When the Anzacs went overseas, they didn't go overseas as member of the Liberal Party or members of the Labor Party. They went as Australians. We need to put the ideas of class warfare behind us and to reunite the nation. They've silenced Australians who simply dared to ask questions and demand answers. The right to ask questions is fundamental to a free and open society. But under the Liberals and Labor, Australians have been denied this basic right. History shows us that segregation is an evil. It shows us that we must reject authoritarianism and instead pursue more democratic and inclusive ideas. Recent history is full of examples of what an elected government can do when it becomes emboldened with too much power. Governments love to use a crisis, whether real or imagined, when they seek to subvert the democratic process because they tell people that it's for their safety or for their protection. We know what the usual outcome is. The usual outcome is tyranny. The Australian government must bring these rogue states into line. It is in the Liberal and Labor Party's interests to create fear, to create division. A divided society is easier to control. While people are busily fighting amongst each other, the Liberal and Labor Party want to be left free to control us, unabated and unchecked. Liberal and Labors have already caused too much damage to our nation with their $1 trillion debt. If you believe, as I do, that this nation has the strength and potential to live out its heritage, to fulfil the dreams of the Anzacs, to return Australia to the lucky country, it should be you that must give your vote to the United Australia Party. Australians can make a difference. Together we will stand up. Together we will create change. Together we will make a better tomorrow. And we'll live by that slogan, freedom, freedom forever.
So there were only two. They hadn't got a clue. Clive came along, sang a different song, one for me and you. Now I have a say, a real Australian way. Now there'll be no more fear, and the road is clear, sky is clear and grey. I know what I'll do, gonna put my faith in a party true. A team that knows a way to fight for me now every day. And that's my kind of party, the United Australia Party. Yeah, that's my kind of party, the United Australia Party. So sound the starting gun, you know we've just begun to make Australia great. We got it in us, mate, United Southern Sons. Won't throw away my vote, or let the unions glow. Won't let us bother around, we're gonna hit the ground. Got the antidote. I know what I'll do, gonna put my faith in a party true. A team that knows the way to fight for me now every day. And that's my kind of party, the United Australia Party. Yeah, that's my kind of party, the United Australia Party. Yeah, that's my kind of party, the United Australia Party. Yeah, that's my kind of party, the United Australia Party.
This program has been produced and paid for by the United Australia Party and authorised by Clive Palmer for the United Australia Party, Brisbane. Education should set us free. Abolish and forgive all student education debt so your life can be truly free too. For a free education, vote 1 United Australia Party. Authorised by Clive Palmer for the United Australia Party, Brisbane.
The best welfare is a job. The best security is a home. The best life is a family. The best country is Australia. Love Australia. Put Australia first. Vote 1 United Australia Party.
Authorised by Clive Palmer for the United Australia Party, Brisbane. Liberal and Labor have created a $1 trillion debt. This debt will trigger interest rates to rise above 6%, causing 80% of Australian home loans to default. United Australia Party will protect people from losing their homes by putting a cap on interest at 3% for 5 years. Adding a 15% export licence on all ore that leaves the country will pay off the national debt for us, keeping our homes protected. Save your home. Save Australia. Vote 1 United Australia Party. Authorised by Clive Palmer for the United Australia Party, Brisbane.